Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. If you've been watching for the last few days, you saw that little teaser where I showed this little lure holding up that vise, and I talked about how I've been working on a really rigid interior structure for soft plastics, and I promised to show you how I do it, so stick around. So I'm back from the Keys. Isla Mirada was beautiful, had a great time, a little bit of weather, but not too bad. We actually got some good fishing in and just a lot of fun with some old friends. And hopefully I'll be able to do it again next year, and maybe with some lures more appropriate to those waters. But today we're talking about making a soft plastic lure more rigid and more durable, really. Now, a lot of you looking at this and thinking, well, why do I need a soft plastic lure that can lift a vise? Well, you probably don't. Now, this little tiny lure obviously doesn't need to be that strong. This is just a sort of a prototype. I needed something to kind of test the concept, and so I'm just using the ones I've been making, these little ones. Now, I've already put out a few videos on how to create a more rigid internal wire harness, and I'll go ahead and link those either here or there, I never know. But in those videos I kind of go through the ideas I had, the flaws in my original designs with just one wire, and then how I came up with a truss, and then an even stiffer truss. Well, instead of continuing to describe them, let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the evolution of my design, right? So I started off making these soft plastics and using the original harness that I use on my hard body lures, and it fits right in the silicone mold, and you can see it's got a bunch of extra bends in it, and that's for adding weight and putting the rattle in there. But I quickly realized that with all those bends, it had too much of a range of motion, and what that meant is every time I hooked up, this thing would move so much it would rip the actual plastic on the lure. So I moved on to this, which I thought was very clever because it essentially had two legs, and what that would do is that if I hooked up here, you'd have a direct pull on this one or on this one. So if you hooked up on the tail hook, you'd have a direct pull and there would be no movement. But I didn't realize that this can happen, and it actually can, because the lure can hook on two different spots on the fish, and then the fish can move, and it actually ripped the lure that way. So my final design sort of was a truss, and I realized that if I could make it really rigid in all directions, or nearly all directions, I could really make a lure that would last for a while. And so I made this little truss design, and it's just like a truss on a roof. It has three legs and the main cord going across the back. I had to make it relatively shallow because I wanted to make the lure two color, and the way I do that is with applying a plug on the inside of this. And if you haven't seen that, you should watch that as well. So this is the harness that I use now on my standard what I call a soft belly, and it's got some range of motion, but the beauty is that the range of motion between the hook eye and the toe eyes are almost nothing. It's very little. Now it will go in this direction, which is kind of nice, and it does have a little bit at the tip, and that really is dependent on how far back I go with my connection on the bottom there for that truss. So from there I realized that I needed to make something just a little more rigid if I wanted to make a lure bigger, and this is what this is all about. I want to make a big lure. Now I started off by creating this truss. Now this is an arched cord truss, and it's a little more rigid, and instead of wire tying this, or actually winding it with some line, I soldered it with silver solder, which is really strong. This is 0.5, oh, I'm sorry, this is 0.05 inch wire, stainless steel, spring steel, and it's pretty rigid. Now let me show you what it does under the kind of load that I just put this one under. So here's that same little wire contraption I made to hold the other one. And hopefully you can see this, but I'm going to go ahead and just grab the very bottom. And then as I pull on it, you can see that the whole thing sort of flexes. You can see it flex and it begins to buckle to the side. And while it's rigid enough for something this small, this is actually really rigid and could probably be used on a lure slightly larger than this. I needed something for a bigger soft plastic. Let me show you what I had in mind. So something like this. A Swimbait with a bulky front of the body and then a very narrow tail. My expectations is I'm going to probably make this somewhere around 7 inches long, and I want it to be a Swimbait. I'm going to have sort of a dumbbell shaped tail where the fluke shape is sort of natural, but as you look down it's just sort of a bulbous end that makes it flop around. So my intention is to have a hook hanger right at the back of the belly, right at the beginning of this quick transition. Obviously the toe eye in the front, and then a belly hook somewhere around here. Now, if I were to use a regular truss on something this big, the wire would have to be really thick to make any real difference in how rigid it was. So I really was thinking about, how am I going to do this? So my solution was, instead of a truss, to make a girder. And so it'll look something like this. And it'll have lightning holes in it. So you can see I still have an arched sort of shape, the triangle shape, and this is made from a flat piece of aluminum. Let me show you. To show you exactly what I'm talking about, I'm going to go ahead and just destroy this plastic, and you're going to see that it has those lightning holes in the aluminum girder. Has two functions. One, it makes it lighter, and the other is fastens it inside there and makes it less likely to move or shift to cut through the plastic. So I'm just going to go ahead and rip this apart. There you go. And you can see I've got a nice flat girder that fits my lure mold just about right. Now I made this out of a piece of scrap aluminum I have, and this is relatively tough aluminum. It's probably, I don't know, 60-25 or 60-50 alloy. The thickness of it is 0.038 inches or 0.98 millimeters. 1 millimeter I think is about the right thickness for a larger lure. Once you've got the general shape that you want. Now what I did was I used an existing truss, and by using that I could just simply put a dot everywhere I knew I needed a hole, and then simply create a simple shape around it. And then I could just design where I wanted some lightning holes, and essentially you end up with this. And once I got a shape I liked, I simply put it on the printer and made a copy of it. And then by taking a clear plastic sheet, I can just trace this really easily. You get the point. It's real simple to do. And then I just mark the centers of the holes. And then once I have that done, I can just simply cut out a perfect stencil. And now I can use this to mass produce these guys. I can just trace them on the aluminum and then cut them out however it is easiest for me to do it. Now, I won't go into how I cut this one out because everyone's going to be a little different. Everyone's going to have some different tools. I had some heavy tin snips and of course drill bits and a Dremel tool to sort of refine the shape around the holes. So a lot of you are probably thinking, well, you know, how strong is that really? It's aluminum after all. How thick does the metal have to be right around those eyes? Well, if you keep it right around a 32nd of an inch, you'll have more residual strength than you will need. This thing right here won't break. Calculated out, the strength of this aluminum right at that cross section, at the thinnest cross section, is about 70 pounds, which is more than enough. That was the trick right there. real simple once you've realized what it is. If you're making big soft plastics, this might be the way to go. And you just got to remember that the longer you make this girder, the more rigid that lure is going to be. And so you'll notice that on mine, the tail hook eye is right at this point where the lure narrows, and I've got this big tail section that'll stay limber and swim and give me some action. I hope this helped you guys out. Thank you to everybody who's watching, and thank you to everybody who's commenting and asking questions. That's a lot of fun, sort of solving problems with you guys. I'm hoping to go ahead and make a mock-up of this real soon, and I'll share that with you as well. So thank you again, and I'll catch you on the next video.